Hello and welcome back to the Fire Break. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing new technologies for putting out fires. Check us out on the web at teamwildfire.com. Fire, boy, everyone has experiences with it and stories about it, feelings about it, but I'm not sure that we know that much about it. So I wanted to invite a guest today who knows a tremendous amount about fire. It's John Heinen, and John is a fire investigator, and he also runs a company called Compass Fire Investigations and Consulting. I'm not sure what the consulting is, but I definitely get what the investigations are. John, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Steve.
Absolutely. So tell me about the field of fire investigation. What do you
Yeah,
do?
absolutely. So the fire investigation is the trying to figure out the origin and cause, where the fire started, how it started, and I got my start in the municipal fire department as a fire investigator, like many fire investigators do. So I guess it's a overglorified simplification of a process of elimination, along with all the forensic failure components to kind of get us into where the fire started and how, and using all that fire chemistry and fire dynamics and kind of all that fire geeky stuff.
So a lot of people who do bad things with fire think, well, the fire will cover my tracks, but in fact, the fire makes their tracks. Is that right?
Yeah, I agree with that, right? I mean, it's one of the only things in the commission of the crime. So if you're talking about, like an intentionally set fire, it does destroy some evidence. I mean, that's the only crime out there that does that. You shoot somebody, you stab somebody, you generate nothing but evidence, whereas fire destroys some, but like you said, it leaves a lot left. And I've always sort of told people that I equate it a lot to reading a book. And it's just the language that I've learned. And so when you go into a fire scene and you see the fire effects and the patterns and the smoke and what's damaged and what's not damaged is just as important. That is like reading a book. And so I equate it to the same thing. If you give me The Little Prince in Greek or Winnie the Pooh in Greek, I can't read it. And but if you take it to a 5-year-old in Greece, they'll read me the whole story and they'll sort of chuckle and say, "How come you can't read Winnie the Pooh?" It's all about what you've learned. So it's the same thing. To some
And do you,
folks, it might look like a whole bunch of burned up stuff, but
right.
to us, it tells us something.
I see. So you see a great more detail when you look at a fire. But you're right. Most people look and say, there's a burned up building. There's a
That's
burned
it.
up forest, right?
That's
Yeah.
right. Right.
Right. And to you, it tells a story. Very interesting. Um, how much of your work is focused on the investigation of intentional fires versus accidental fire?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest thing is, even in the municipal side, I finished out my career with Charlotte Fire on the task force, and we went to more fires that were intentionally set than were accidental, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that if it was a simple fire and it was straightforward, no loss of life, injury, etc., the captain was sometimes making that determination rather than calling out the investigation team. On the private side, we go to a great deal of accidental fires as well as the intentional set fires. The majority of the clientele would be the insurance companies or lawyers for the recoverability and subrogation purposes. And so, first and foremost, they want to determine if their insured is involved in fraud and, an intentional fire. But a lot of the work and the very detailed work really gets into the failure analysis of, holding a unsafe product accountable, the manufacturer, the installer, or workmanship. And so it might be an accidental fire, but if there's something wrong with the appliance, then that's where a lot of the work goes. So
In what cases is the chain of accountability clear or not? I'm asking because as a pyrotechnician for and fireworks guy, I get called in as an expert witness a lot, and much of it has to do with failures of different pyrotechnic devices, usually fireworks, and the the entire chain of, where did this firework comes from is one word, China. But there's, it doesn't tell you who the manufacturer is, where it comes from. So
yeah, and we run
do
into
you come
some of the
across
same
that?
problems, sometimes with that. And it's not always as clear to figure out where it's manufactured or, the whole roots of it. That's definitely part of the investigative process, trying to identify if there is recoverability, to identify the other interested parties so that they can attend the joint study, and, we can, get information and go from there. But so sometimes it's the manufacturer, sometimes it's records, sometimes it's, design engineers and trying to, figure that out. So that's definitely a difficulty in the industry, especially with some of the imports.
Yeah, a lot of them. And I was wondering, with regard to the field itself of fire investigation, what's the rate of change and the pace of acceleration? What are the new areas that are emerging?
I would say there's a great deal of change, and as we're going through it, I mean, it's a younger discipline in science, so it really wasn't until the late 70s, early 80s where it really got defined, and we started having, the guiding documents of NFPA 921 and the creation of, NFPA 1033 for the requirements. And so as we go through all those different consensus standards, and we have a brand new one that just came out this year, NFPA 921. So I'm still working my way through and re-tabbing up everything in the book and breaking it in. But as we understand more about the science and repeatability and utilizing the scientific method, it's no longer just an art, or the person that has 5 bugles that says, hey, the fire started in the corner because I said so, because I've been doing it the longest. So, I mean, it definitely changes there. But where I would also say that it really changes and accelerates is the type of material and how much stuff that we have plugged in. You just sort of think of like your kitchen fire, for example. When I got into this 20 years ago in the fire department, you'd go in and there was the electric slide-in range, and next to it you might have a stand mixer, and you might have a toaster on the other side. Pretty simple kitchen layout. Now you go into a kitchen, you have all those things, but you also have the electric air fryer, you have the deep fat fryer, you have the small oven top convection oven, as well as the toaster, and then all the accessories that get plugged in and laid on the counter. So your cell phone, your laptop computer,
Your
the
Alexa,
old
your
iPad.
electric can opener, right?
Correct. Like all
Yeah.
the stuff. And so now, that's where so much has changed too, because of what the end user is putting inside of a structure. So how we're doing that. So not only does our science update and our methodology of how we're going about this, but also our products, the materials, all the equipment, and our electrical systems. It's all changed. So we have to change at the same pace as everything else is changing. And everybody's talking about the electric vehicles and all the lithium ion batteries and just the influx of everything that's changing. So,
Yeah, the lithium ion battery is certainly a big topic.
oh, it's a huge topic, right? And it's
Yeah,
not
right.
just the electric vehicles, it's not just what's on the roads, but it's also what's across the board in our house. I mean, all the way from your cell phones and laptops and iPads, all the way to, my built-in in-counter water filtration has a lithium ion battery in it in order to turn on the light and tell you after 3 months when to change out your filter. So,
Okay.
right.
Are those ones subject to spontaneous explosion or detonation?
Yeah, well,
or
I
not
really
detonation?
wouldn't say that it's spontaneous explosion, but the lithium ion, the danger is really the thermal runaway. So it's, just like any electricity or battery, in the normal operation, it generates heat. And this is a very oversimplified, explanation and understanding. But as it generates the heat, if you can't dissipate the heat properly because of something went wrong, that's where you start to go into the thermal runaway, and that's where it's generating more heat than it's able to, dissipate, and it just becomes like kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it generates. But say you have a fire right next to your kitchen sink, or it's in the kitchen at the range, but the general area, now you've got all these other things that you have to look at and evaluate. So it's not as simple as, going into the kitchen and looking at the range anymore, and just the range.
So I know there's a lot of science that goes into, let's say the architecture and engineering of my home or a home, right? A lot of scrutiny on the materials, the wood, the frame, the studs, the sheetrock, all rated and all arranged, hopefully for, minimum fire. But then I go out and I buy stuff and I fill my house with crap, and there's lots of plastics in it, which I've heard many people refer to as frozen gasoline, and things change. So is there a push towards making all of the things that are available to me to buy as scrutinized and as fire resistant as the home itself?
Yeah, I think it's so I think that's a kind of a multi-pronged thing. So no, I don't think that we're going to be able to ever control the amount of stuff that we put in our house, or exactly how it's all assembled. I think the biggest issue is that we've sort of changed our building construction and how we do, from the legacy construction and very compartmentalized, and there was the kitchen, and there was a bedroom and a hallway, and it wasn't an open floor concept. And now, it's very general to build these big, huge cathedral ceilings and open concepts. And so the fire, it kind of moves about. And the same thing has changed with our, material inside of our house. So we've gone from wood and, traditional products to, like you said, plastic and everything else. So as long as we have, safe products, and they're coming from reputable suppliers, and we're utilizing them in the appropriate fashions, we can put things in our house. I think the concern comes is when we're, doing things that are not safe in nature. Or we're blocking our exits, or we're loading up the whole back bedroom instead of a bedroom. We've turned it into our storage unit, and now
Or a charging station.
Right, right. We're charging 5 e-mobility bikes, or we've got all of our DeWalt, our lithium-ion remote batteries. We've got them all plugged in, and we're starting to utilize that bedroom, and the construction was utilized for a bedroom, not for a charging station, or storing your gasoline or your lawnmower instead of putting it in the shed. So
Have you come across people who love their lawn equipment so much they put it in their bedroom?
Well, maybe not their lawn equipment, but what we do see a lot is when you look at like a multifamily apartment building, there's a lot of folks that'll pull their motorcycles or mopeds in it in the evening for theft purposes, so that they're secure, because people could pick them up and put it in the back of a pickup truck and take it away. But if you're in that circumstance, a lot of times you don't need lawn equipment. But I have definitely run across motorcycles inside, and that's what's really plaguing a lot of the big cities. New York City and San Francisco right now is with all the e-mobility, all the e-bikes and the delivery bikes, is everybody's bringing them inside, and then they're charging them overnight. They're charging them inside. San Francisco just a couple weeks ago enacted a local ordinance trying to cut down on that, and now they have it where you can only have, I think it's 2 or 3 e-mobility devices charging within one unit inside of a multifamily house, apartment building or condo, because, our buildings weren't set up to have that kind of explosive power being plugged in and put in there. So even if it's a sprinkled building and fire alarms, we're behind the 8 ball if we have a catastrophic failure, because they're so explosive. And I'm sure you've seen some of the videos with lithium ion, and
Oh yeah.
the curve, it accelerates. It goes from here's the fire to boom,
Boom.
all the way up, instead of like that gradual, curve, that heat flux curve that we've all seen.
So, are there, in your imagination, simpler ways to control this? You wheel your e-bike into this bag and then you charge it.
I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is that everybody's trying to come up with what is the answer.
Yeah.
And so there might be products, absolutely, right? I mean, there's other things out there that are trying to be developed, whether they're insulating and wrapping the individual cells within the greater battery, or they're charging it or putting it in charging stations, or building something else. But I think a lot of it has to do with good common sense and application, because a lot of the times what we're finding is that you have the e-bike and you have the battery, and then the battery wears out, and so then it gets replaced with a non-UL tested battery, or we're charging it with a different charger than what came with it, and so it's no longer an approved system. And so that's where the lithium ion is very susceptible to overcharging or over discharging. And there's a big market for buying non-approved safety regulated batteries. The batteries that are tested by UL or another approved third-party testing, they're expensive. It's expensive to buy really good high-grade batteries. And so there's a big market for non-tested batteries. And so that's where a lot of the problems are. So if we went to utilizing only approved batteries, and we kind of sort of tightened up, and we had more support from all the regulatory factions in order to get rid of the underground unsafe product out of our marketplace, then if people took that and approved systems and charged them in appropriate manners, didn't charge them blocking the front door, didn't charge them in their egress path, charged them when they were awake and able to detect if they started to have a problem and they could get out. So charge it while you're sitting there, rather than charging it overnight when you're sleeping and you're already going to be disoriented and delayed and everything else.
So it sounds like you're saying that there's a strong connection between a UL rating and the likelihood that a battery will fail in a dangerous way.
Yeah.
Because the Tesla fires, the Samsung computer fires, the cell phone fires, I'm imagining that these are all approved batteries.
Right. So, the thing is that, no third-party testing is ever going to make it 100% fail-safe. And so it's not like you can just have the stamp on it and never have a problem, especially when you get into batteries, because in and of themselves, they're very stable, but they're very susceptible to misuse or mechanical damage or design tolerances and issues like that. Where when you have an approval rating, what it really helps to do is it helps to verify that they've been tested and that they're being designed and manufactured in an approved manner. And so it helps, absolutely. We definitely need approval, like a UL approval on our components. And then the other part is education of the consumers to understand how to utilize your batteries and how to take care of them and how to charge them and what to do or not to do. I always like to point out when I talk about batteries, the first and foremost thing is, think about some of the first lithium ion batteries that were utilized in our portable tools. And myself included, what do a lot of people do? As soon as you get them, you rip open the package, you take the directions aside. You're like, I don't need directions. I know how to use a drill. You take the battery, you plug it in, and then when it's drained, you go plug it in. And oftentimes that's in your shed or your garage, which is non-conditioned. Down here in the Southeast, it could be 105 degrees, 110 degrees inside that shed on a July summer. But if you go back and read the directions, the manufacturer tells you, hey, for your battery, don't charge it above this temperature. Don't charge it below this temperature. Don't store it outside. Don't store it in the elements. Store it, where it's being conditioned inside of, that 60 to 75 degree range that's nice and happy and, keeps the battery, performing at its peak performance. And it's not just about performance, but it's also about the degradation and breakdown of that battery. So, some of that is, that's an approved system. It's been tested. That's, a safe thing, but then the end user is not utilizing it appropriately. So we're sort of causing some of our own heartache and problems with this stuff when we're not understanding that a battery is great and we love, especially lithium, right? We like it because it packs a lot of energy into a small footprint. Nobody wants to go back to carrying a bag phone for their cell phone, with the big external battery and plugged in. But we got to treat it like it is what it is, rather than, just a big old case and we can abuse it and kick it and drop it. Or you'll see that a lot with the e-mobility devices, the scooters and the bikes, because they just get left out in the elements. They get tipped over and beat up. And, that's not how batteries are meant to be. We got to treat them with a little bit more respect, if you will, and understand what they are.
Well, yeah, I would imagine scooters and high impact devices are going to require a more ruggedized battery construction.
Right. And then the casement and the protection, so that's all part of the engineering. And, I think that's, for me, one of the really neat things about fire investigation is that it's not just about finding the origin and cause. So absolutely, that's what we're doing. But the greater good to me that I see is that we're really taking this, analytical data. We're taking what's actually working and not working, and we're feeding it right back to the front end, to the engineers, the code development, right? So it's this full sphere, and I've been very fortunate in my career to be able to go all the way through all those. So, in the beginning, we've got the code, and we try to, make the buildings, like you said, we make them as safe as possible so it doesn't fall down on our heads, or we can get out if there's an emergency. And same thing with all of our devices. We do all that engineering, and then then we're going to get into the education component where we're teaching the public about what we're doing and why we're doing it. If those two things fail, here comes the big red truck, right? So if our true mission of protecting life and property fails, then here comes the firefighters, because we've got the operations, right? So we've got to mitigate whatever the ongoing emergency is, and then we're going to investigate it to figure out what's happening. And, obviously that involves the crime aspect, but it also involves, the accidental, unsafe products or bad workmanship, and getting that out of the market through multiple means. And we feed the information right back to the front side. And the process starts all over again. And so that's the part that I really like about fire investigations, and when we get into this failure.
When you talk about the importance of educating the public about, a device, right? You can see the batteries right over my head here, my favorite black and yellow ones, right? And they're sitting there charging, and
we've all got them.
Yeah, right. And then when I bought them, it came with this manual, as you said, right? And when I open it, and the first thing that's there is the safety instructions, and there's 200 of them. You're not going to read any of them. Whereas if they were to say, okay, these are the 4 most important things, then you might actually read them. I've seen the same thing in gun ranges. You walk in and there's like 300 rules all over, and nobody reads them. You said, right. Okay, here are the 4 basic safety rules. Follow these, and you're just going to cover virtually all situations.
Well,
so
I wonder, Steve, if that has more to do with like our intentionality of why we're putting the rules in the manufacturer in this playbook, or the guidelines. Are we doing it
font, right?
Right. Are we doing it as a litigation legal CYA, or are we doing it because of education and actually, the affective change and trying to change people's behavior and actually do it about safety? I would say, in a best case scenario, it's probably a little bit of both. But you and I both know that we live in such a litigious society that I think that probably is the driving force behind a lot of it. And so, it's all written with legalese, and it's all written in, super confusing aspects, rather than, like you said, maybe trying to boil it down. Here's where it's at. This is what you need to know. These are your take home points that you need to remember. And so I think that's part of the job of the professional as well, is to get this message out, not just about batteries, but about everything. I mean, that's the message about checking your smoke alarms, the message about, being safe in your kitchen while cooking and getting out of your house and having a plan in place. So it's, but I agree with you. I think that it's hard when it's the top 10 things that you need to know and learn about is mixed in with all the CYA bullet points as well.
Yeah, right. Now everything comes with 2 instruction books: the instruction book and the quick start guide.
Right.
Right.
Well, and then maybe that's really where, we could, as professionals, push back into the manufacturing world a little bit and say, what can we get a couple of these bulleted safety points over to the quick start guide? Because if somebody's going to read the instructions, that's probably what they're reading most of the time. But that's, and then that goes back to kind of your first question about everything that's changing and how fast. I mean, just that right there to me is an example of how everything is changing. So it's going from a manual to a quick start guide to now you get a QR code, and the expectation is that you're scanning it, or that you have the capacity to scan it and watch a video or read the instructions online. And so it's trying to keep up so that we can educate our public and do that as well.
Well, those are both pretty easy metrics to measure: how many products you sold, how many times the QR code was scanned and someone went to the site. And
Right.
if you see, hey, 6% of the time we sell a product, people actually use the QR code.
Right.
That tells you, okay, well then you have to
Right.
judge this based on the effectiveness, not based on what your intent was. And if it's ineffective, you need to find another strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then you take all of that and you put it on a global product market. So then, everything's in multiple languages, and it's trying to make it as, universal and accessible as possible. So you have kind of like, I call it the Marshmallow Man, and it's just the pictures, and then you got to sort of play the game of what changed versus step 1 and step 2. What are they trying to tell me? And right, am I supposed to put the bolt in here or the nut there? And
right.
But
I got extra parts left over.
Right. And am I supposed to have extra parts? Is that part of the plan, or is it just that I missed something in one of these steps? But I think that's where people are missing some of the stuff on how to use their product safely. And it might look the same, but how it was made, or the batteries, or the equipment, or the product, things change. And so you can't just go on, well, I've been utilizing this type product or this type drill for 30 years, and I don't need to read an instruction booklet, because things have changed in 30 years on how they made that drill and how you should safeguard it and plug it in and charge it and everything else. So
yeah, one of the biggest difference between is that 30 years ago most people knew how to use a drill, and
right
now if it's not an app, they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, well, we definitely have a different, probably a little bit of a variation of skill sets, right? As everything sort of changed from, agriculture and manufacturing to technology and a very static and, books and sitting at a desk, and, our base level is changing. People don't have or coming in with the same mechanical aptitude necessarily into their everyday application.
There's probably a reason why, that it's a stereotype, like, oh, there's an old guy across the street and he's got a shop in his garage. Like, because he's an older guy and he grew up at a time when, learning how to do things with your hands was part of the culture, right? You took shop in high school,
Sure.
but now they take coding.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so there's
Yeah, things change, right? And so now
right.
we've got folks out there that, like my kids can do stuff. And I have an 8 and 5-year-old, and the other day we were sitting on the couch, and he whipped open his iPad and, scrolled down and chose the remote and changed the TV channel because he didn't like the cartoon that was on. And I was like, wait a minute, like, I don't remember teaching you about this. But it's just, they might not necessarily be learning into the mechanical aptitude, but they are a technology native.
Yes,
And
they
so that same aptitude where you could manipulate something or take apart a motor and understand the general concepts, it's the same thing. Kids now can look at a computer program or an app and see 3 dots or the hamburger and say, well, that's the menu. I click on that. That's my settings. I go to the gear icon and I can, work from there. Versus somebody who's not a technology native, you sort of have to do the breakdown. Step 1, go to the gear icon in the upper right corner. Step 2,
right.
Click it. Step 3, open it up and, scroll down and choose this, hover over something. And, so I wouldn't assign a value of good or bad. I would just
No,
say
of course.
it's different, right? I
Yeah.
mean, people are coming in with different skill sets, and it's upon us, I think, where we're sort of bridging the gap, and you have multiple generations within a specific industry, or like in fire investigations, our job is to really kind of bridge that and understand and bring the next level to understand what we're bringing to the table, and vice versa, get that recent graduate that is very familiar and comfortable with certain things to, share their knowledge and understand that everybody will run into what I like to call the knowledgeable other. There's always somebody else in the room that's more knowledgeable about something.
Usually someone half our age, right?
Right? Yeah. Yeah, so it always just sort of depends. So
You probably call your 8-year-old over and say, how do I use this program?
Right.
Help me turn
Yeah.
on my phone, right?
Yeah, and I can't imagine what
Yeah.
it's going to be like in 25 years. I mean, think back 25 years ago.
Right.
Obviously there were some people that predicted this forward progression and where we would sort of be at. I was not one of them. That's probably why I'm still working for a living. If I had figured it out 25 years ago and been on that front end of the curve, but I can't
Bought
imagine
those
where
stocks,
things are going
right?
to go in 25 years. But that's part of the issue with fire investigations. For me, that's a challenge, but also very rewarding, is how everything is changing. And so you have to keep up with it, and you have to understand all the different things that are out there that are the products. So, because all those things can cause a fire if there's a failure or if they're misused, in addition to obviously the age old, I'm just going to do the dirty deed and use a lighter and light something on fire and, have an incendiary fire. So it's a challenge, but it's also very rewarding to keep your foot in the door and keep learning about all these different aspects.
Right. It's not that you're learning stuff. It's that what you're learning is informing the next iteration of that product so that it's safer.
Right.
Yeah. So you talked about this being a global problem, and I'm curious if there's like a parallel chart where relative safety in different countries is the same, but looking very different. So we might have our lab approvals here and science and product and the way you investigate things, all contributing towards making things really safe, but making these things safer in an environment where we also have all these risks. And I'm wondering, let's say we were to go to primitive area in Africa, we might say, well, they have no fewer percentage or higher percentage of fires than we do. They have no UL, they have no fire science, no product stuff, but they also don't have a million things on the countertop to start a fire. So
right.
I wonder if our fire science is because it's necessary because we have so many risk things, whereas if we had a simpler life with less technology, there would be less ignitions to worry about in the first place.
Well, I mean, there would definitely be less of, certain ignitions, so there might be less of the electronics or batteries or, some of those what you might commonly think of as, the products that are seen in the first world. But I would say that we definitely had just as many fires. Even looking back to our history here in the States, how many fires that we had and kind of what this was born out of. So I think that's an interesting thought, and I don't know if there's a quantifiable the data out there for underdeveloped or developing nations and about their fires. I haven't done a lot of work on that. But
I mean, it looks like we're going back now, and we're looking at indigenous burning practices
right.
in cultures that had no technology and
right.
also don't have these massive wildfires.
Right.
Because when you're so connected to the land as your source of food, your source of shelter, you're also connected to the idea, hey, there's fire out there. Everything should be fire aware.
Right. Yeah, I mean I think that's a very interesting thing. And yeah, I would definitely, for me, I'd like to do some more reading about that to try to understand. I mean, a lot of the stuff globally that I've dealt with is in other developed nations in Canada and Europe, and they're utilizing the same scientific principles that we do here in the States for determining origin and cause of fires, and they have safety regulations, and a lot of the aspect when you look at other countries is you start getting into a lot of, human behavior, and other countries have a much different stance on safety than the United States, in the sense that there's a lot more personal ownership for safety, and it's sort of baked into their culture a little bit stronger than ours. Whereas, here in the States, we sort of rely upon our codes and standards and our building, and we rely on the municipal fire departments and the 911 system to keep us safe. And that's not to say that people aren't themselves safe, but it's not the same culture. We get a lot of resistance to safety here in the States because a lot of people think it's in direct contradiction to, capitalism and
freedom,
speed, and
right. I can put trees as close to my house as I want to. It's
right,
my house.
Right. So it's it's the wildland or the structure, the construction element. There's a lot of just sort of baked in resistance to safety and not really understanding it, or we rely upon OSHA and the employer, somebody really needs to take care of us, and there's not as much personal ownership of I need to be my biggest self-advocate and take care of myself and safety. Yes, the employer needs to do their part and everything else. Whereas what I've seen a lot of times is other countries, it's more baked in for that personal ownership that there's a lot of responsibility to make things safe in their own environment, and the emergency preparedness and everything like that. So I think it'd be interesting to really kind of dive into that and kind of compare that and developing countries and the use of fire, and utilizing it more, like you said, maybe when growing up and utilizing fire more often as a tool, that you have a greater understanding and application of that, and so you're not as sterile from it, and so maybe it's not a formalized safety and approval the same way, but maybe the deeper understanding of safety around fire is stronger.
Very interesting. Well, I'll give you a few weeks to research that. You tell me how long you need, and we'll reconvene right here, and we'll talk about.
That sounds like a great PhD, human elements, psychology, human behavior, fire. That sounds like a great study. I'm sure someone's probably already done it, but
Yeah, I don't know. One of the difficulties you'd come across there is that every country has not only different data but different reporting standards.
Right.
And
so
methods,
then you try to figure out how do you compare apples and apples.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's pretty hard, right?
Yeah.
I was trying to last year. I was trying to find out something really simple. How much does each country spend on wildfire suppression? And
were you able to come up with that?
I was able to find out that every country tabulates it differently.
Okay.
So that's interesting.
I mean,
John,
were you able to draw any conclusions from it, or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that there's 3 countries that seem to spend a lot more than all the rest. The U.S., Canada, and Australia.
Right.
And that everyone else is, and also ran.
And we seem to have the biggest. Those are the 3 that have the biggest problems, right?
Right. But luckily we also have the budget to, to deal with that.
Right.
So that's great. Well, John, I can't thank you enough for joining me here today. Really appreciate your insights and what you bring to this space. So we're definitely going to do this again.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it was great. Very fun.
Awesome. So we'll see you back here soon then.
Yes, sir.
We've been chatting with John Heinen. He is the owner, founder, and principal investigator at the Compass Fire Investigations and Consulting Company, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Thanks so much, and go check out his website. This pretty cool work that he's doing. You're watching The Fire Break, or maybe you're listening to The Fire Break, depending on how you take in your technology. See? But if you listen, there's less of a fire risk, right? Because it's simpler technology. Thanks for joining us. We're sponsored again by Team Wildfire on the web at teamwildfire.com. And we'll see you soon. Take care.